So let me invite our panelists to, you've heard each other, we've heard each of us. So why don't you share some top line thoughts? Let me start again with Pauline. Unmute yourself first, please, Pauline.
I will indeed. So I would like to challenge the thought that the pandemic showed we could change. So I completely agree that is correct. So who would have thought a year ago that all of us would be wearing face masks, as we go about our ways? What I would say is the difference with the pandemic is there were laws which were put in place that told people you must do this. It was treated as a crisis, very clear direction, very clear reasons given why we have to do it, and people were held to account if they didn't obey, all by their peers, by their neighbours, as well as sort of by government and policing in some cases. So I think we're not seeing that now. And I guess that's probably my challenge, that we are in a crisis. All of the evidence is there that we are, we're at the point of no return. So we can't go back to the pre-warming days. So I do think small changes are important, but I think now is the time, for the first time, for this world, that we have to make big changes, and we need to be bold and brave, and we need governments to take very clear, direct action, and we need, as leaders, to support and encourage that. I don't think incremental is good enough at this point in time. That's mine.
Thank you, Pauline. That's a very direct message to governments who might be listening. I agree.
I want to jump in.
Yeah, Doreen, over to you. Yep.
You bring out an excellent point. So the problem then, if you're looking at this from a problem, the problem to be solved is not what the changes are. That's secondary. The problems to be solved is how do we get the governments to make this happen, right? How do we make this happen? So maybe we have to take a step back and say, okay, we can solve the climate problem. Like, we know what to do. Maybe that's the answer. But how do we get these regulations in place? Because we now know that really works well when we tell people that you got to do this. So often in design, again, is solving problems. It's not about the artifacts of the pretty thing. That's our problem to be solved. So you just brought out a new challenge, which I think is an excellent challenge that we all have to look at. That's the problem to be solved. Because I know I'm sitting here in the state of Texas, and if any of you read about our snowstorm in February, I had no water. I live in a very nice area. I had no water and no heat for 5 days. That's insane. And that was all government driven, right? So how do we get the governments to put in those regulations and make those change? That's our problem to be solved.
Thank you, Doreen. Luis?
Maybe elaborating a little bit on this direction. I think that the pandemic has showed us that governments act when the problem reaches a significant dimension. In the specific case of the relationship between sustainability and businesses, the biggest issue is that we need global commitments so that everyone can then implement the regulations, comfortably. Because although the clean technologies effectively can beat nowadays not so clean technologies in terms of economic performance, the fact is that this happens because they have been supported during a certain period. And there are still some technologies that are needed that are going to require either a slight competitive disadvantage at the start. I'm thinking, for instance, of green hydrogen when compared with conventional hydrogen. It's still not as cost effective. So there needs to be some global commitment that allows the users of green hydrogen that are contributing for a more sustainable future not to be placed at competitive disadvantage against those that keep on using the not so clean hydrogen. I mean, this type of agreements, they need to come from global arrangements between governments, multilateral organizations, and all of that. And if the COVID pandemic has showed us that governments act when things start getting serious. The pandemic also has an issue, shows an issue where the governments need to improve, which is precisely on the global coordination. Because it's one of the things we can say is that the crisis is getting extended beyond what it could have been, precisely because we don't have that global coordination. So, the Paris Agreement type of deals, these type of things, they need to be renewed regularly. They need to be incentivized, and people need to be generous when signing this type of agreements. I'm so glad that the political climate in of course a very important country for all of this to happen has changed so much over the last few months. Talking, of course, about the US, because we are going to need this open attitude, exactly the opposite of the me first attitude that we saw for 4 years, in order to make something like this work. People will have to be generous with each other if they want to strike a global deal. And this global deal that we have, we will need to renew this, I don't know, every couple of years, every 4 years, something like that, if we want to be able to reach the net zero by 2050, let's say.
Thank you, Louis. Very insightful. If you allow me to misquote Winston Churchill, humanity usually does the right thing when everything else has failed. So I think it's time to go for Q&A. Mala, why don't you curate the questions and then put it to the right panelist?
Yes, so I have one for Pauline. What are the stumbling blocks for water meters to become mandatory?
Again, that's a good question, and in some areas they are, so we can make them mandatory. Certainly in our area, it's a water stressed area, so we have that possibility. To be honest, I think a lot of it is engaging with customers to have them understand the need and why we're doing that. It's interesting. I'm Irish, and I was very surprised when they tried to roll out water meters in Ireland a few years ago. The absolute outrage from everybody involved, who was seen as an imposition and being imposed upon them. But the reason we're doing that, most people who, the person who's asked the question probably knows, most people who have a water meter installed benefit from it, because it means you're accurately being charged for the water that you're using, and otherwise it's an approximation. So it seems a fair system, but I think it's about explaining to customers, and that's certainly what I've seen in the last few years. Explain to customers why we're doing it, and not preaching and not sort of being paternalistic, but explaining that the whole environment, the water cycle, the scarcity of water, why we're doing it, why we have to appreciate and value water, and this is one way of getting us to understand how we're using water and to reduce our usage. So I think, yeah, we could say just do it, but I think there would be too much pushback. That's one area where I think it's about explaining and bringing our customers and communities with us on the journey.
Yes, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Pauline. Mana.
Yeah, I have one more question. One question for Doreen. Are you seeing a change in the type of technology being designed for the deskless workers versus those who are desk bound, and how often is sustainability a consideration in creating these kind of technologies?
I think in the generation now that is creating new things, sustainability is absolutely an issue. I can tell you, when I look at, and Nandu, you could probably talk about this too, when we look at the students that are growing up today, that's almost on their radar is equal to eating. Right. So they're very conscious of it. So I think they have the concept of sustainability. In fact, I was just looking yesterday, I was reviewing master's projects in health, and this is in health, every single project had a sustainability aspect to it. So I think things are being designed for that in mind. And I think we have to make products and services that are human-centered. That means they're easy to use, they're simple, they're something that we want, they help us. And that will drive, whether it's for the people that are sitting at desks or the people, that will drive the change. It's the products and services that are simple to use. So Nandu, I'll just go back to your Uber comment. Taxi cab companies had GPS, were computerized. They had all the pieces to do what Uber did, but Uber made it human-centered. They put the consumer, the end user, in that case, in charge of their own destiny, which became something that was really favorable. Now, you understand this when you go out and you talk to people and you understand what are those barriers that are blocking people? Why isn't this happening? And again, those are the problems to be solved. And once you understand those insights, that will help you then make those changes.
Thank you. Can I have just one final question? Okay. So apart from how has COVID impacted the crisis, which I think many of you answered, quite, nicely. The person here has asked, are people going back to being focused on their individual health versus community versus planet at large as a result of COVID is what I'm interpreting. But that's the question. Are people, and this is to anybody who can answer that, are people going back to being focused on their individual health versus community versus planet at large because of COVID?
Only if they don't understand what's going on with COVID, because the difficulty in stopping the pandemic is precisely the lack of coordinated action. If we leave important countries behind, what we are creating is more possibilities for the virus to mutate and to mutate into a form that makes it hard for the current vaccines to be effective. So it's a clear demonstration that health has a very, very strong component, which is community, which is global even.
Mm.
I would suggest that the pandemic has made people more aware of the environment and of how important it is. Certainly here in the UK, we've seen people sort of moving out of cities and moving to locations and appreciating parks and rivers and areas of natural environment much more so. So we've actually seen that's been one of the benefits of the pandemic, that people have a greater appreciation of the environment and are more willing then to engage in dialogue and discussion about doing things to improve it. So
I couldn't agree more. I've discovered woods around my place which I did not know existed.
And what we take for granted becomes much more precious.
Absolutely.
Which is how we have to start looking at the environment. So the absence of community made us more aware of the fact that we need community. And that's part of the scene change. And we have to get to that place with our environment and sustainability. The absence of water or power or just simple things that we take for granted is also going to help make people make those changes.
Another element of interest is that I guess we all had that feeling of almost living in a doomsday science fiction movie when confinement started, and you saw no one on the streets, everyone was at home. A few things started not working. We couldn't get a haircut, things like that. Well, if we don't do this right, that's the feeling we are going to have, but for a longer period, So there's a massive incentive on doing things right on what concerns sustainability and energy transition.
Brilliant. Thank you, Luis, and thank you, everybody. That's been an absolutely wonderful session, great panel.